gathering out here, sir?
Josh, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good, man.
Come on in. Come into my house. Sure. Well, actually, I didn't want to be a storyboard artist. No. When I first moved out here, I think I wanted to act.
Really?
So yeah, I had a design studio in Boston, and I followed my wife out here. She was a makeup artist, so followed her out here. And I was trying to do anything and everything to make money. So that was the big thing. I'm living the dream of being in Hollywood, but I'm doing anything I can to make money. So I still had some design gigs from my place in Boston, but was trying to look for any work, and I think I wanted to be a famous actor or something like that. And then I auditioned for open call, like a cattle call for a movie called Manosaur. And because I didn't have a lot of acting credits on my resume, I had written, for special skills, whatever, storyboards, because I had done them for like student films I had done and one advertising job. And they're like, hey, storyboards. If you do storyboards for our film, we'll give you a part in the film. And I was like, okay. So I went out and got the only book I could really find that really talked about storyboarding, which was Shot by Shot. Did you ever? Yeah, love that book. Still today, it's still one of the best books, I think. Yeah. And I spent a month working for free, storyboarding out some major action sequences for Manosaur. And I sent it in, and they got their funding, and they never gave me a part.
No way.
Yep. But I did take that to Storyboards Inc. and got an agent. But here's the best part, is that years later, I was actually producing a short film for a friend, and I went to a place to get costumes, like police uniforms. And I went in, and for some reason, the weirdest part is it smelled familiar somehow. The place smelled familiar somehow, and I went in, and this guy came up, and there was something about him that was familiar, because he had this his hair was like he put shoe polish in it. And so maybe that's what I was smelling, I don't know. But basically, we were talking, and then I noticed behind him a Manosaur poster. It was the fucking producer.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, and not only did he not feel bad for not giving me a part like he promised, he felt responsible for the fact that he had launched my career.
That's great.
Well, I started as an illustrator, and that's still to this day a problem in my career, because I want things to be beautiful. One of the things that I learned very early on is this is about speed, not about pretty. I have grown to love being a storyteller. I don't know that I was that first off, but I think in doing this for a long period of time, I think at a certain point, certainly not right at the beginning, but after a while, I started realizing that I had ideas, and I love brainstorming, and nothing excites me more in the process than when a director and I are trying to work it out, and we're like pitching ideas, and I'm like, no, that's stupid, no. But you go from stupid idea to stupid idea to stupid idea to finally both of you going, oh, yeah, that. And that's the juice of this for me, right? The drawing now, in a way, is sort of the homework. Now I have to go draw it, okay. But the coming up with the ideas and the brainstorming about it, that's the fun part. And that's the real play, because you aren't limited to anything. And one of the other things, too, is that started to come out of this for the storytelling. So that I do consider myself much more of a storyteller than an illustrator. And if you look at my artwork, you'll agree with me. What I remember, first of all, was the idea of feeling that there was so much to know and I didn't know anything. First of all, when a director first did this to me, I didn't know what the hell this was. Like, yeah, peace, brother. I'm like, I didn't realize this was yeah, we're going to move the camera this way. Oh, it's the camera. Okay. Yeah, I had no idea what that was. And they would talk about gear and certain types of, you know, oh, we're going to do this film process stock to the stock, or we're going to do this, and I had no idea what this stuff was. And this was sort of just at the beginning of, you know, being able to look that stuff up on the internet. So I was always afraid I didn't know what I was doing. And still today, I mean, it's always like, oh, I don't draw this very well, or I don't know what this means, or you know, and it's the idea that you're trying to figure out what somebody wants. I've always loved, I mean, so I'm going to say it's a lot. So um, comics I definitely loved, and old school like 70s Spider-Man. One of the things I always loved is the fact that they stylized things, but it still felt kind of real, right? The way they drew the body, and now it feels like everyone's sort of over photoshopping things and trying to make things look too real. The thing I liked about you know, those comics is the fact that they understood anatomy, and they could, you know, flip the body upside down and do all those sort of cool things. But it was sequential storytelling, right? And I like that. Oh, well, first of all, I think the biggest challenge for me is doing something that you've seen 1,000 times. And especially when I worked with one director once, and he's like, okay, we have to shoot the scene in a car. I want to do something that people have never seen before. And I'm like, good luck with that. I do, it annoys the crap out of me, but I do like to be challenged in the sense of sometimes I'll have an idea for something and I'll sketch it out, and they're like, that's too, we've seen that before. And I'm like, yeah, because it works. And they're like, no, but what more can we do? So sometimes the directive of shooting things that we've seen before in different ways is a challenge, because sometimes my brain goes to, and I don't know if this happens to you, but I'll be in that mode of like, oh, you know, we'll do a tracking shot with them, and it's like, yeah, we've seen that 1,000 times. And part of me goes, yeah, because it looks great. It's like, yeah, but how do we make that different? And sometimes there's the balance of the reason you do that sometimes is because it just works. So, so I've done bazillion commercials. I like commercials. I've worked with a lot of famous directors, both feature film and people who were famous in other areas. I like the idea that I'm working with a lot of different personalities, and I get to work in a lot of different styles. The deadlines kill me sometimes because it's really fast. So that's what I am doing. I've decided more and more that I want to do more television and you know, go back to more television and features. Television for me is sort of a great in-between. My only problem with films is that I also get bored sometimes, so the idea of working on something for 6 months, sometimes that's boring for me. So I've had the chance, Dan Kaplan, who's a great storyboard artist, he was busy and let me work on a couple of projects that are his. So I got to work on Star Trek Picard and oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank on the other one, Westworld, and loved those experiences, and it was great. And it's Dan's gig, so I'm just filling in for him, and they love Dan. But it was really fun to do that, and it got me, you know, I mean, one of the first big gigs I ever did was Lois and Clark, the television show. And the thing I loved about that was the fact that, first of all, I got free reign of being on the lot. I would get my little script from Superman, and then I'd walk around and explore the lot, you know. But it also really taught me a lot about special effects. And I like working a lot with VFX teams and that sort of stuff. So I think more television, because I think television, like, there used to be a time when television, like, ooh, television, but now television is sort of like the golden, right? You get to do great storytelling, and you don't necessarily have to do it for, you know, 6 months. So in a commercial world, you know, I get the call from the agent. You're working on Thursday. Oh, yay! Usually, what will happen is the producer will send me script, the treatment of the director, any related locations if they have any of that sort of stuff, and then I'll get all of that material. And then in the good old days, I'd toddle off to production company and sit down with the director. I go into the meetings with the director. It's almost like a sports professional. Like a little prayer, like, let me hear the right ideas and be open. And I try to like leave my ego at the door. Like this is not about me having the right idea. It's about the finding of the best ideas together. So, and that I also understand that I'm here to serve. We talked about how important storyboards are, but it's just a piece of the puzzle. And one of the things I love about making films is the fact that I get to be a part of something I could never do by myself, right? It's you're working with the best in the creative field. But at this point, it's just me and the director in a room, with people bringing you coffee and sandwiches and stuff like that. And you're in there just trying to figure out what's the best way to do this. How are you going to intrigue people? Most of the directors that work with me really want to work things out. In fact, usually the first day is just sketching stuff out. We're brainstorming, talking about what can and can't work, and we'll try to go through as many of the spots as we can. Once I have that, I draw with non-photo pencil, rough it all out. I print out. I have frames that I sort of print out with the information at the top, and I'll go through, and then I'll add marker to it, and, the black line, and then tone. And I have a tendency to. I'm influenced a lot by great old 2D animation, because one of the things about 2D animation for me is that it really gives that beautiful sense of depth, right? Dark detail, closer, midground, lighter, less detail, background. And I have a tendency to use those tricks in composing my frames so that when you really look at it, it does give you that sense of foreground, midground, background. So I have a tendency, I've gone back and forth between traditional, so marker and pencil and stuff, and digital. I love what Photoshop can do, and I bring everything into Photoshop and sweeten it there anyway. I feel clumsy in it. It feels, and it's getting better and better, but I always sort of feel like with the feel of the paper in my hand, and again, that's because I was trained this way, right? So that's sort of ingrained in me. But I feel sometimes when I'm working on a tablet or whatever that the computer is interpolating my, I think that's the right word, interpolating. It's not a direct one-to-one. It's kind of going, oh, you did this. Do you mean this? Whereas with pen and paper, it's exactly what I intend. I like a lot of the visuals that you can do in Photoshop, and I love Command Z, which you cannot do, when you're drawing traditionally. And so I go back and forth. I think I'm slower because I don't use it all the time. I think I'm slower. And when I look at other guys like your work, and I just kind of go, wow, you've really sort of found that way to make it feel like a real drawing, but in this medium. Because I think sometimes when I look at other people who are just using it, it feels overly done. You and I touched on that a little bit, just sort of shooting the breeze beforehand, is that a good storyboard artist, a good storyteller could do it on a napkin with a pen. It has nothing to do with the gear. And that if you're getting too enamored with the gear, that might be getting in the way. Now, I'm saying that as a guy who's not using that much gear. But and as I said before, I've had to storyboard under all sorts of circumstances. So, carrying a laptop and a Cintiq is a lot harder. But I do like the dramatic effects that I can get digitally that I cannot get by hand. Oh, well, there's a lot of no-nos for storyboard artists, and I've done most of them. Well, I'll tell you the first one. So one of the things I often recommend for somebody who's trying to start off is, say, for instance, there's a commercial you like. Literally just freeze frame it and go frame by frame and draw those frames in your own style, but learn from how it was composed, and render it out yourself. You can still put that in your portfolio, especially when you're first starting out, but never, ever tell them that you worked on the job, because I did that. Oh, yes. And they're like, oh, yeah, so you worked on this VW commercial? Oh, yeah, yes, I did. And I was like, I don't think so. I was on that spot, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, oh. So what I've learned now is instead of fibbing, what you do is go, because first of all, if they worked on it, it'll be good for their ego. You'd be like, oh, I loved this so much. I was inspired by it, so I just wanted to practice with it, right? So that does two things. First of all, you can still use the work because they can show that you can draw and that sort of thing. But if they happen to do it, you boosted their ego for the day. You also touched on delivery. That's, I consider myself an optimistic person in general. I think I'm overly optimistic when I do storyboards because I'll be like, hey, it's only 14 frames. I should have that done by like 2 o'clock, 7:30 at night. I'm still rushing to send it in. So, and most of the producers that know me will joke with me about that, and they'll be like, yeah, so you told me 2, so I said 7. So. I was working on a PSA with a producer that I knew, and she's like, we got to go right now. We got to go talk to the director. He's got a very limited window. So we went, and it was Ron Howard, and I was like completely starstruck, and she was like, hi, I'm Ron. I'm like, yes, Mr. Howard, I know who you are, sir. And what was really funny about it was the fact that he's talking, but in my head I'm going, I'm sitting across from Ron Howard. Do you guys know this? This is Ron Howard. Like it was really funny. Like I almost had to have him repeat everything that he said because I'm busy having this dialogue in my head. The thing that was funny for me too was he couldn't have been nicer. Like at a certain point, he had to take a call, and we were in his office. And he said, I'll go take it by my secretary's desk. So he let us stay in his office, and he went and took the call as opposed to like throwing us out and whatever. And I just actually recently worked with Bryce on a Volkswagen commercial. Super nice. She was super nice. But I had to gush about her dad, and I was like, is that really a good thing to do? Like, you're your own person. You don't necessarily need to hear about your dad. But yeah, she was super nice. Well, I'm definitely gonna say Mr. Spielberg. There are lots of other great directors that I learned from, and there are so many different films that I love. But the joy, and I actually just saw an interview with Steven recently that he was just really talking about trusting yourself. Like he's talking to young filmmakers. Trust yourself, and bring the joy, tell a good story, bring the joy, and don't be worried about trying to be somebody else. And that's one of the things, actually, when I teach storyboarding, one of the things I really work on is, again, what is the story that you're trying to tell? Don't start thinking about shots. Don't start thinking about the gear you want to use. Really focus on the story and the emotionality you want to do. And I think if you're really clear about that, then the style will start telling you, showing itself to you, as opposed to this idea. So, yeah, I mean, I still look at Jaws just as some of the best storytelling ever, right? I mean, you can look at, with visual effects, it would be a lot better now or whatever, but just for sheer storytelling, it's fantastic. So first of all, when I'm talking to somebody about, they ask me what I do, and I say I'm a storyboard artist, they're like, I'm sorry, what is that? The common misconception is that you're sort of like drawing some pictures, when it's really much more about talking about the story and allowing the director, or encouraging the director actually, to really make decisions. And some directors hate doing storyboards because they love having the vague idea in their head. And then now storyboarding starts to become specific, like, oh wait, so what happens? If it comes over the rise, then you can't do this, and like, right. So you start solving the problems, and it's really It's about storytelling and problem solving. Words do not always translate into pictures. And we understand words, and we'll talk about words. And the example that I like to give is because actually something like this sort of happened to me once, is a man steps out of a bar and looks across the street and sees a woman, and it reminds him of his mother. Now, in language, totally understand that. If you're not using language to describe that, how do you tell that story? It doesn't necessarily translate. Do you use a flashback? Well, like, how do you establish these things? And it's a whole different challenge. And I think a lot of times, especially in commercials, they get locked into the language, right, and they don't see a picture with it. And then when we start talking about what the picture looks like, it's a problem. I would have to say, I think it's a lot harder to do it now than when I started. I think because filmmaking has become more complicated in a lot of ways, that just being good at drawing or just having a love of film isn't enough. I think you really have to be an ongoing student of film. Certainly when I'm talking to somebody about starting this, there are a few basics. If you can't draw people well, you better start there. Because there's nothing I've ever drawn. I mean, I don't have to draw horses that much. I mean, I do have to draw them occasionally, but I can fake that. But I'm drawing people every day. So get to draw people well. I think that you have to look at a range of filmmaking and understand it. Everything from Hitchcock to whoever your favorite guy is now. One of the things when I used to teach young, I taught students, and sometimes that they were only referencing things like 2 weeks out, like a commercial they'd like, or a horror movie that they saw last year or whatever. It's like, no, you want to expand that. So to make it, I think you have to have a combination of things. Because a storyboard artist is not just somebody who draws, and it's not somebody who just understands storytelling. It's a very intimate relationship, right? It's you alone with the director, and you're trying to encourage them and their ideas, or you're trying to, when you're working on I've never worked on a Marvel film, but I have friends that have worked on Marvel films, and you're taking this huge franchise and helping it be its best. So you have to understand all sorts of language of filmmaking. You have to be able to draw competently. You have to be good one-on-one with people. You have to go in with the idea that you are there to serve. You have to be flexible, right? Both in the idea that you might have a great idea and you submit this idea and they're like, no. And that happens all the time. And sometimes it's frustrating because you're like, well, why didn't you tell me this beforehand? But sometimes the process is they need your ideas first to move forward, and then they're using that as a reference of what's working and what's not working. You have to have a reasonably thick skin, and you have to be a good team player because it's really not ultimately about you. It was really fun to do this. I mean, it's so great to talk to another storyboard artist. We don't get to do this very often. It's a very lonely existence. So it's great to thanks for inviting me.
So now I need funny B-roll stuff for this. So you gotta be funny for me.
That's going to be a challenge.
I like the mythos idea. Storyboard artist mythos. Yeah.
You gotta tell me the story about the flamingos.
I just like them.
And there's a lot of times where I'm just like sitting in my chair like this going, ah.